Welcome to Diaspora Bridge, Africa, your direct line to the motherland. In this explosive interview, Captain Ibrahim Traoré breaks his silence on the real war happening in West Africa, a conflict that goes far beyond terrorism. Captain Traoré reveals the shocking truth about how foreign powers and imperialist forces are actively working to see Burkina Faso fail. From the deliberate sabotage of weapon supplies to the hidden agendas behind resource control. This is a deep dive into the AES struggle for true sovereignty. Why is the mainstream media hiding the reality of the African revolution? And we explore how these geopolitical shifts threaten the status quo and what it means for the future of global security and economic independence. This isn't just about a nation. It's about a continent fighting for its soul against those who profit from its chaos. Deep inside the heart of Ouagadougou, at the historic Koulouba Palace, something unprecedented is unfolding before our eyes. It is not just another press conference or a routine government update. It is a historic confrontation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the leader who has become a symbol of defiance across the Sahel, is sitting across from 10 journalists in what feels more like a trial of history than a simple interview. They are there to ask the hard questions about the war in Burkina Faso and the future of the AES alliance. They want to know why the victory he promised 3 months into his presidency has not yet fully arrived. But as we pull back the curtain on this conversation, we realize that what is happening in this room is about much more than just security. It is about the very soul of a continent and the birth of a new era of sovereignty. What if the collapse of the old colonial order in Burkina Faso is actually the first domino to fall in a shift that will forever change the global dominance of the US dollar and the financial security of the West? If Captain Traoré succeeds in keeping the gold and lithium of the Sahel within African borders, how will that impact the global markets that your own pension and savings depend on back home? And why is it that the most powerful military establishments in the world are watching this one man so closely as if the survival of their entire system depends on his failure? These are the questions that the mainstream media refuses to touch, but they are the keys to understanding why this war is being fought so fiercely today. To my brothers and sisters across the diaspora who have felt the weight of systemic injustice and the pain of being told, your history began in chains. This moment belongs to you. We have been told for decades that Africa is a land of endless tragedy and incapable of leading itself. But what if that story was a lie designed to keep you from seeing your own strength? There's a deep anger rising, but it is an anger fueled by hope. We must ask ourselves if the struggle we see today is the final labor pain of a motherland finally giving birth to its own freedom. Before we look at the maps and the military strategy, we must look at the human cost of a system that profits from African poverty while preaching about global democracy. This is not just a battle against desert insurgents. This is the real war. It is a high-stakes collision between a small nation demanding its dignity and a global superpower structure that cannot afford to let go of its grip. This is a game of strategic chess where the pieces are not just soldiers, but the very resources that power the world. But why is the opposition reacting with such visceral desperation to stop this momentum? Why are foreign diplomats and hidden forces so terrified of a sovereign Burkina Faso? We are about to strip away the propaganda and show you exactly what is at stake in the next few minutes. If you believe in the truth and you want to support a voice that stands for the global African family, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button right now. Sharing this broadcast is how we break the media blackout and stay connected as one people. I want to see our community fill the comments section today. If your heart beats for the liberation of our people and you believe the time for Africa to stand on its own has finally come, type Africa Rise in the comments below. Let your voice be heard from Chicago to Ouagadougou as we stand together for the dignity of our ancestors and the future of our children. The critics love to point their fingers at the calendar. They take a single statement made at the very beginning of Captain Traoré's journey and turn it into a weapon of doubt. You heard the question in that room. They asked him about his promise that 3 months would be enough to end the war if everything was put in place. Today, 3 years have passed and the fighting continues. But before you let the mainstream media convince you that this is a failure of leadership, you need to understand what was actually happening behind the closed doors of diplomacy and military command. Captain Traoré did not shy away from this. He looked them in the eye and explained that while his wish was for a swift victory, the reality on the ground was a trap set by those who never wanted the war to end in the first place. When he spoke about having everything in place, he was talking about a basic level of honesty and cooperation that simply did not exist. Imagine for a moment a man like Musa. Musa is 42 years old and lives in a small village in northern Burkina Faso. For years, Musa watched as foreign military convoys rolled past his farm, promising protection, while the shadow of violence grew longer every day. Musa is a man who worked his entire life to provide for his family, but he saw his livestock stolen and his neighbors flee while the so-called experts in air-conditioned offices told him that peace was just around the corner. The injustice Musa feels is not just because of the insurgents, but because he realized that the people claiming to help were actually managing the conflict rather than solving it. Captain Traore revealed a chilling truth in this interview. As soon as he took power and showed a real desire to end the bloodshed, he was met with immediate adversity from foreign forces. He spoke of heated debates with diplomats who arrived with a hidden agenda. These foreign powers didn't want a quick resolution. In fact, they approached the new government with a proposition that sounds like something out of a spy novel. They wanted the government to accept their support, while they were simultaneously maintaining ties with the very groups causing the chaos. This is a war being deliberately maintained because a stable and independent Africa is a threat to the old world order. If Burkina Faso is at peace, it can control its own gold. If it is at peace, it can set its own prices for its resources. For the imperialist mindset, a controlled chaos is much more profitable than a sovereign peace. This is where the connection to your life in America becomes clear. When these regions are kept in a state of perpetual instability, it allows for the plunder of resources at bottom dollar prices. This keeps the global supply chains flowing in a way that benefits the top 1%, while the average person in the US deals with the fallout of global tensions. Captain Traoré realized that the real struggle was not just against the gunmen in the bush, but against the diplomats in the boardrooms. He had to make the hard choice to remove the French and American forces, because he understood that you cannot win a war if your partners are secretly rooting for your defeat. But the most shocking part of the story is what he found when he opened the doors to the National Armory. We often think of national armies as having vast reserves of equipment, but the reality Traore inherited was catastrophic. He told the journalists that in the entire country of Burkina Faso, there were fewer than 100,000 rounds for Kalashnikov rifles. To put that in perspective, that is barely enough for a single day of intense combat for a modern army. And as for the weapons themselves, he found barely 100 functioning rifles in stock. How can a nation defend its people with 100 guns? It is an incomprehensible situation that was allowed to persist for years under previous administrations that were more interested in pleasing foreign masters than protecting their own citizens. The military was not prepared for war because it had been systematically weakened from within. Traoré described a situation where soldiers were sent to the front lines without weapons. Think about the bravery of a man standing in the gap for his country, knowing his own government had failed to give him the tools to survive. This was not bad luck. This was a deliberate policy of disarmament. Powerful countries refused to sell Burkina Faso the weapons it needed to defend itself, even as they lectured the country on security. They wanted Burkina Faso to remain a child, waiting for a parent to come and save it. By exposing this, Traore is teaching us a lesson in true sovereignty. He chose to turn away from those who blocked his progress and sought out partners who were actually willing to sell the equipment needed to win. He began an aggressive recruitment and training program, bringing in 15,000 new men every year. But more importantly, he shifted the mindset. He stopped asking for permission to survive. He began building a defense industry within Burkina Faso so that in the near future, the weapons used to protect African soil will be made by African hands. This is the third phase of his plan, and it is what the global powers fear most. When a nation starts manufacturing its own defense, it becomes truly untouchable. The 3-month objective was a vision of what could happen in a world of honest actors. But Traore found himself on a battlefield of shadows and lies. He has had to rebuild an entire nation from zero, while the rest of the world waited for him to trip and fall. But as he told the press, they are not going anywhere. The war will end, but it will end on their terms, not the terms of those who profit from the blood of men like Musa. To understand the true magnitude of what Captain Traore is doing, you have to look at a map, but not the kind of map they showed you in school. You need to see the strategic chessboard of West Africa, where a new line is being drawn in the sand. This is the story of the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have decided to link their destinies together to form a wall of resistance against a system that has exploited them for centuries. But as Traore pointed out in his interview, when you decide to make a revolution and stand on your own feet, you must be prepared for the world to try and knock you down. He spoke openly about a reality that should concern anyone who believes in national sovereignty. Burkina Faso is being encircled. If you look at the borders, you see military movements and new camps springing up in Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Benin. These aren't just neighboring countries going about their business. These are strategic positions being established by foreign interests right on the doorstep of the revolution. One journalist asked him directly if he felt the AES countries were being surrounded, and his answer was as chilling as it was honest. He said it is a logical consequence of their choice. When you stop being a puppet, the puppeteer doesn't just walk away. They try to tighten the strings or cut them entirely. Think about a woman like Awa. Awa is 50 years old, and she has lived through several changes in government in Burkina Faso. She remembers when the foreign soldiers first arrived, promising that they would bring peace and that the local army didn't need to be too strong because the experts were there to help. Awa now realizes that this was a trap. By keeping the national army weak, the foreign powers ensured that Burkina Faso would always be dependent on them. This is the ultimate form of control. If you cannot defend yourself, you do not truly own your land or your resources. Awa sees her sons joining the new military units, and for the first time in her life, she feels a sense of ownership over her country's security. She isn't waiting for a white flag or a foreign savior anymore. She's trusting the men who speak her language and share her blood. This sentiment is echoed by thousands of Africans living in the diasporas. Take a look at people like Dr. Samuel, a brilliant engineer living in Maryland. He is part of that generation of educated Africans who moved to the West for opportunity but never stopped looking back home with a heavy heart. For decades, men like Samuel watched as their home countries were treated like children by global institutions. He recently heard about an American general who claimed that African countries do not need to be militarized. Samuel sat in his home in the US and laughed at the irony. Here is a general from a country with the largest military budget in human history telling a nation fighting for its survival that they shouldn't buy weapons. It is the height of hypocrisy. Captain Traore addressed this exact point with a sharp wit. He explained that the old system wanted Africa to stay defenseless so that foreign forces could sit down and provide security for them. But Traore is changing the game. He is building a powerful army because he knows there's no such thing as a state without a strong military aid. He revealed that even the world's greatest powers are now reaching out, wanting to train with the Burkinabe forces. Why? Because they want to see how this small nation is doing the impossible. They want to know how the special forces are being prepared and who is training them. The secret, as Traore hinted, is that they are training themselves. They are using their own brains and their own field experience. They have stopped believing the lie that they are worth nothing without Western validation. The chessboard is moving, and the old players are losing their grip. Traore mentioned that many African heads of state still allow themselves to be used as tools for imperialism because their hands are tied. They betray their own brothers to stay in favor with their former colonial masters. But the AES is a different kind of alliance. It is a confederation of the willing. They are integrating their defense, their diplomacy, and their economies. They are proving that when you join hands with your brothers, an encirclement becomes meaningless because you are no longer alone. But there was one moment in the interview that left everyone leaning in. Traore spoke cryptically about a black albino who will soon appear. He told the journalist not to ask what it meant, but promised that they would understand later. This kind of mysterious confidence is exactly what terrifies the imperialist powers. They cannot predict his next move. They cannot infiltrate his inner circle because his soldiers are trained at home, not in foreign academies where they can be indoctrinated. The question we have to ask ourselves is simple. Will we continue to support a world where a few nations decide who's allowed to be strong and who must remain weak? Or will we stand with those who are brave enough to build their own future? This is a Ban Colon, a grand master plan. And the stakes could not be higher. If Burkina Faso and the AES succeed, it will be the blueprint for a new Africa. It will mean the end of the era where African gold and oil are traded for empty promises of protection. Do you think Africa can truly stand on its own without the help of Western military bases? Can a united Sahel change the balance of power for the global African family? I want to see your thoughts in the comments. If you are tired of the double standards and you want to see a continent that belongs to its people, type New Africa in the comments below. Let's show the world that we are paying attention to the moves on this chessboard. In every revolution, there comes a moment when the leader is asked a question that has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with mortality. In that room, at the Kuluba Palace, the atmosphere shifted when a journalist looked Captain Traore in the eyes and asked him something very personal. He asked if the captain was afraid. You have to understand the weight of that question. Just in the past year of 2025, there have been several foiled coup attempts and countless plots to take him off the board. The danger is not just a theory. It is a daily reality that follows him every time he steps out of his office. But Traore's response was not what you would expect from a man with a target on his back. He didn't talk about armored cars or secret bunkers. He talked about trust. He said his only strength is that he is not afraid because he trusts the people. This is a profound statement for any leader, but especially for one in West Africa. He explained that since the people entrusted him with this mission, he must stand before them and tell them the truth. When a leader is honest with his people, the people become his shield. But there is a deeper layer to this security that we need to talk about. Traore is a student of history. He knows the names of the giants who came before him, and he knows exactly how they were taken down. Think back to 1961 and the fate of Patrice Lumumba in the DRC. Think of 1972 and how they got rid of Kwame Nkrumah. And most importantly for the people of Burkina Faso, think of 1987 when Thomas Sankara was betrayed by those he called his brothers. The journalist reminded Traore of these names not to scare him, but to remind him of the pattern. The imperialist forces rarely attack from the front. They manipulate from within. They find a greedy officer or a jealous neighbor and they use them to pull the trigger. They use the complicity of neighbors to ensure that a revolutionary voice is silenced before it can wake up the entire continent. Traore's answers showed that he has learned the hard lessons of the past. He told the press that the first duty of a revolutionary is indeed to stay alive so the struggle can continue. But he isn't just leaving his life in the hands of a security detail. He is personally involved in his own protection. He is breaking the cycle of the past by changing the way his officers are trained. This is a crucial point that we often miss. For decades, African military officers were sent to elite academies in the West to be trained. But Traore realized that if you let foreign powers train your forces, they also have the opportunity to indoctrinate them. They put their own ideas and their own agendas into the heads of these young men. It makes them easier to manipulate later on. This is why Traore immediately created the new military schools and institutes right there in Burkina Faso. He wanted an army that was built on African experience and African loyalty. He personally took part in the training of the first units. By doing this, he has made it nearly impossible for foreign intelligence agencies to infiltrate his ranks. They can't get inside because the men standing guard were not taught by them. This is the kind of strategic thinking that keeps a leader alive. He isn't just reacting to threats. He is anticipating them. He is avoiding the mistakes of the past and refusing to let history repeat itself. Now I want you to think about what happens if a leader like Traore fails. For the American taxpayer and for the global community, the stakes are incredibly high. When a nation like Burkina Faso is plunged into chaos, it creates a vacuum that is filled by even more radical forces. It leads to mass displacement and humanitarian crises that eventually demand billions of dollars in foreign aid and military intervention. By standing strong, Traore is actually providing a form of stability that prevents these global catastrophes. But the mainstream media won't tell you that. They would rather paint him as a putschist because he doesn't take orders from the boardrooms in Paris or Washington. The ghost of Thomas Sankara still haunts the halls of power in West Africa. Sankara was a man who believed that Africa could feed itself and defend itself. He was taken because he was too successful in showing that a different way was possible. Traore is walking that same path, but with his eyes wide open. He understands that the hope he provides to the people is the very thing that makes him a target. He spoke about the behaviors and ways of living that a revolutionary must adopt to stay safe. He is not interested in the luxury or the flattery that usually comes with high office. He is a man on a mission. To our audience, especially those of you who have seen leaders rise and fall over the decades, you know how rare it is to find someone who puts the mission above their own life. It takes a certain kind of courage to stand in the face of an empire and say, I will not compromise, because as Traore said, once you start to hesitate, you start to compromise. And once you compromise, you are done for. The people of Burkina Faso are beginning to hope again. They see a leader who isn't hiding behind a foreign flag. They see a man who's ready to die for them, and because of that, they are ready to live for the revolution. But there is an even bigger fight happening right now, and it isn't being fought with guns. It is being fought with words and images. The way the world sees Burkina Faso is being controlled by a media machine that has its own agenda. Traore had some very strong words for the journalists in that room about their role in this struggle. He challenged them to stop being the voice of imperialism and to start being the voice of their homeland. This is the battle for the mind, and it is what we will explore in the next part of this incredible story. The real battlefield in 2026 is not found in the dusty plains of the north or the dense forests of the border regions. The most dangerous fight is happening right now inside the minds of millions of people across the globe. Captain Traore knows that you can win every military engagement and still lose the war if you do not control your own narrative. During that intense session at the palace, he turned his attention to the media, and his words were like a cold bucket of water for the journalists in the room. He didn't use the polite language of a typical politician. He spoke about the white man's school and how the educational systems of the West have been used to train African intellectuals and journalists to view their own homeland through the eyes of their former colonizers. Think about how powerful that is. If the people who are supposed to tell your story are using the vocabulary of your enemies, they have already surrendered. Traore pointed out a glaring double standard that we see every day in the mainstream news. When there is a mass protest in France to put pressure on the government, the media calls it a mobilization for democracy. But if the exact same thing happens in Burkina Faso, the headlines in Paris and Washington call it a riot or an act of instability by a putschist regime. This isn't just a linguistic accident. It is a deliberate form of psychological warfare designed to make the world see African sovereignty as inherently chaotic and illegitimate. Imagine a man like Kofi, who is 55 years old and has lived in London for the last 3 decades. Kofi is a brilliant scholar who has spent his life studying political science. For years, he believed the reports he read in the major Western newspapers because he was taught that they were the gold standard of truth. But recently, as he watches the clips of Traore speaking directly to the people, Kofi has started to feel a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. He sees the disconnect between what the headlines say and the reality of a leader who's actually building schools and factories. Kofi represents a massive part of the African diaspora that is currently going through a mental decolonization. They are realizing that the information they consume is often a filter designed to protect the interests of global finance and the dominance of the US dollar. What if the news you watch every night is not there to inform you, but to keep you from questioning why your government is so invested in the failure of a nation half a world away? If the American public truly understood that Burkina Faso is fighting for the right to process its own gold and manage its own economy, they might start to wonder why their tax dollars are being used to support stability, programs that only benefit multinational corporations. Traore is challenging the media to take an interest in the trains that arrive on time, rather than only reporting on the crashes. He is asking for a journalism that serves the interests of the people, not the interests of a foreign board of directors. And then we have to talk about that mysterious mention of the black albino. Traore dropped this phrase like a ticking time bomb in the middle of the interview. He told the world that soon they would see a black albino appear and that the war would end shortly after. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a message to those who understand the deeper spiritual and strategic layers of this struggle. To the imperialist powers, this is a terrifying riddle they cannot solve. To the people of Burkina Faso, It is a sign that there are forces at play that the West cannot quantify or control. It suggests a shift in the very nature of the conflict, something that goes beyond conventional military tactics and touches on the soul of the resistance. This is about justice versus injustice. It is about the right of a mother in Ouagadougou to know that her child will grow up in a country that isn't being plundered for its minerals while the world looks the other way. The K thu kam xuc, or the emotional enemy in this story, is the arrogance of those who believe that African minds must be managed and African resources must be shared. Traore is telling his people to wake up and see that the shackles on their wrists were broken long ago, but the shackles on their minds are still being held tight by the media they consume. The price of failure in this mental revolution is a return to a new form of slavery, one where you are free to vote, but not free to own. But the price of victory is a continent that finally speaks with its own voice. If we don't start telling our own stories, the world will continue to see us as a problem to be solved, rather than a people to be respected. The AES is not just a military alliance. It is an intellectual and spiritual declaration of independence. Do you believe that we are being manipulated by the media to fear African independence? Is it time for us to stop looking to the West for the truth about what is happening in our own backyard? If you are ready to see Africa through your own eyes and not the lens of an empire, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to wake up. Type Africa can do it in the comments below to show that you are part of this mental revolution. As the sun sets over the Kaluba Palace, the echoes of this conversation remain long after the cameras have stopped rolling. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has laid out a vision that is as dangerous as it is hopeful. We have seen the blueprint of a nation that refused to die even when its armories were empty and its neighbors were being used to surround it. This is the reality of the new Africa. It is a continent that is finally starting to believe in its own capacity to lead, to defend, and to thrive. Whether the world supports this revolution or tries to sabotage it, one thing is now undeniable. The chapter of silence and dependency is closing, and a new era of African resistance has begun. We must ask ourselves the big question of justice. If a nation is willing to fight with its last bullet and its last drop of sweat for the right to own its destiny, shouldn't we as a global community stand in awe of that courage? This isn't just a story for the history books. It is a call to conscience. For those of you watching in America and across the diaspora who understand the pain of having your voice stolen and your resources plundered, this is your fight too. When Africa stands tall, the entire global family of the oppressed stands a little taller. This interview was more than just a political exchange. It was a serious message about the reality of war and the rebuilding of a nation by a people who refuse to remain controlled or dependent. Burkina Faso is presenting a different path, one that does not rely on the crumbs from the master's table, but on the strength of its own soil and the brilliance of its own minds. The real war, we discussed at the beginning, is far from over, but the outcome is no longer in doubt because the people have finally woken up. They have seen the hidden sabotage and they have chosen to break the encirclement. Before we end this broadcast, I want to invite you to join us in a moment of solidarity that goes beyond a simple click. We don't just want your likes today. We need to perform a ritual of unity. If your heart is heavy with the hope of a free Africa and you believe that the justice of the Creator is on the side of those who seek liberty, then I want you to perform a simple act of faith and commitment. Join our collective prayer for the safety of these leaders, for the protection of the soldiers on the front lines, and for the prosperity of every African family. If you stand with us in this movement, type Amen in the comments below. Let that word be a pledge that you will no longer accept the lies of the mainstream media and that you will stand as a witness to the truth of this revolution. If your heart beats for Africa's freedom, subscribe to this channel right now and join the United States of Africa family. Share this video with every truth seeker. You know, because the more we connect, the stronger we become. Our jersey may be stained with the blood of our martyrs and the mud of the trenches, but as the saying goes, it will never be stained with the shame of surrendering. We are moving forward toward the new dawn, and we are doing it together. Thank you for staying with us and for being the voice of the voiceless. May the spirit of our ancestors guide us, and may the future of Africa be as bright as the gold beneath our feet. I stand with Africa. Do you? Type 1. Stand with Africa in the comments and let the world hear our roar.